Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto became young king of Uzushiogakure with Hinata after Konoha's betrayal? Part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this and comment for next part. And now let's start the fanfic. I promised you that I would use you to keep secrets diary, and oh my, diary, I have a one for you. Kushina couldn't train today because she wasn't feeling well, so Sota and I ended up sparring in the forest training grounds by ourselves. When we took a break, he got really red and said that he liked me. I hadn't really thought of him that way, but when he looked at me with this really soft expression I felt a weird tingle in my chest. Pretty soon our faces were really close together and then we kissed. It was pretty odd feeling, but it was also sort of nice. We both got very embarrassed after, and ended up stopping training early. I can't stop thinking about it diary. Do I really like him? I hope Kushina doesn't find out. That girl is nice, but she can't keep a secret. Thanks diary, talk soon. Hinata sighed and reread the page. It was strange to think of her mother liking someone before she had fallen in love with her father, but she supposed that it was like that for most people. She wondered if this Sota that had stolen her mother's first kiss was still around in the village. With a suppressed yawn, Hinata flipped into a new position in the bed and had a sip of her now lukewarm tea. She wanted to find out what happened between her mother and Sota. The next few pages spanned a few months, and were mostly secret dates that Hanako and Sota went on. Reading about her mother's dates almost felt intrusive, but regardless, her mother seemed happy while she was writing. Hinata carefully flipped a page and let out an almost silent gasp. The next page has all sorts of cross-outs and smudges. It looked like it had been written quickly and with heavy emotion behind it. With some deciphering, the heiress figured the date to be almost a year into her mother's genin career. Father pulled me out of active duty today. I can't believe. At first, I thought that he had found out about me and Sota and that he was punishing me for it, but this doesn't seem to be the case. He was the most hard and callous he has ever been to me today. He said that I needed to undergo different training and that my role and duty was no longer that of being a village protector. I can't believe that he would. I'm very disappointed with my father's actions. I think this is why he's been acting so withdrawn. He must have known this was coming. How long had? It doesn't matter. I don't know what training they have planned for me. I need to talk to Sota. Anxious to know the rest of the story, Hinata turned over the page to find that only a day had gone by between entries, a very short time for her mother. I got the news today diary. I'm to learn how to run a noble household. I'm to learn how to be a proper wife. I begged my mother to stop father. It's always been my dream to be a kunoichi. I also highly doubt that my being a proper wife is going to be for Sota's benefit. I can't begin to describe how furious I am diary. I've heard rumors that my husband-to-be has already been decided and that he's from a very prestigious clan. Father's ripping everything from me to attach our family to some larger clan. I'm disgusted with his priorities. A parent's planning should only be for their child's benefit. I swear that I'll never let this happen to my own children. Hinata flopped back against the bed with tears stinging in her eyes. She had never longed for her mother to be alive more than this very moment. She knew that rationally her mother may not have been able to stop her father from marrying off Hanabier herself, but it would have been nice to have someone that was on their side, someone who knew how much heartache, going into the service of the clan, was. She also wondered what her mother had told her first love. It hadn't been mentioned in the entry. She swallowed a lump in her throat and reached under her pillow for her own notebook. She rarely wrote in it, as she preferred to sketch, but she knew that the 2 words she had written on the last page of the notebook were still there. In her already emotional state she didn't dare to look at them, but for some reason pulling it out made her feel closer to her mother. Her pain was so similar. Well, not exactly the same, Hinata thought, sniffling a bit as the tears stopped coming. Her mother had been separated from her lover by force and made to marry someone else. The boy she loved had left their village and her feelings had definitely not been returned when he had gone. Perhaps she was luckier than her mother was after all. Perhaps she could forget Naruto and live a pleasant life as a rich man's wife. Even as she thought the words, she discounted them. It had been 2 years since he had gone, and the fire in her chest hadn't lessened yet. No, her eventual marriage would not be one of love. Her heart ached. Thinking of Hanabi was like a balm on the wound. Hinata's and Hanako's dreams would live on through her as she became a strong kunoichi and a clan leader. Hanabi would be able to choose her own destiny and choose her own husband. Hinata would make sure of this. Their mother's sacrifices wouldn't be completely in vain. One of her children could be saved. Reading the previous entry had stirred up Hinata's emotions into turmoil, and she found herself dwelling on the dark subjects she tried very hard to keep buried. Digging through a bedside table, Hinata placed a piece of ribbon into the book to mark her spot and fed off the lamp. She lay still in the early morning darkness for a long time, mulling over the similarities between her mother's story and her own life. The sky had just been starting to hint at daybreak when she finally drifted off into an uneasy sleep. Hinata awoke to one of the serving women knocking on the door. She realized that the sun was already well past the horizon. She sat up and winced. Her head ached terribly. Hinata shuffled to the door with her hand on her pounding forehead. She slid the door open and instructed the women to let Neji know that she would be unable to train today. The woman was observant enough to note that Hinata was feeling unwell and kind enough to offer to bring her a food tray. Grateful for the woman's kindness, she turned around and got back into bed. She had almost fallen back asleep when the serving woman returned with breakfast. Sitting up in bed, she picked at the food provided. She didn't have much of an appetite, but she did drink the tea. She wrinkled her nose as she sipped it. It was very hot and quite bitter, but she was sure this was due to the willow bark, and she certainly couldn't refuse that. After a couple more forced swigs of medicinal tea, Hinata glanced down and saw the midnight color of the leather-bound book on her side table. Her heart sped up a bit. Hinata was torn. On the one hand, she wanted to know what happened next, but she was kind of worried about what she might find out. She had known that her parents' marriage had been arranged, but they had always seemed to care deeply about each other in her memories. Could she trust the memories of a young child? Now that the circumstances of the match had come to light, she found herself doubting them. With a heavy sigh, Hinata placed the book on the mattress beside her and had another sip of harsh tea. She decided that she did need to know. Even if it turned out to be painful, she needed to know. Somehow, she felt that if her mother had turned out happy in her arranged marriage, perhaps she could find happiness in her own. Opening the pages to the frayed pink ribbon, she began to read. The next several entries were spaced apart by several months at a time and they seemed somehow flat. It was as if the emotion behind the entries had been ed away, leaving only facts without feeling. Even the loopy handwriting seemed sharper and more subdued. The short entries mostly described the new training and occasionally spoke of the tension that was ripe within the household. Much to Hinata's disappointment, Sota wasn't mentioned again. It seemed to her that perhaps some secrets couldn't be trusted to anyone, even the ocean. The next long entry was dated for a couple years after the one she had read the previous night. This one seemed to have the emotion restored, even if that emotion wasn't exactly positive. The day has finally come, diary. I met the man I'm to be betrothed to today. It was a meeting of sorts between our two families. It was framed as some type of a friendly get-together, but it wasn't hard to tell that Hyuga were there to assess whether I would be a worthy choice for their oldest son, Hiyashi. I suppose my training must have paid off, since they left the meeting seeming pleased. I didn't get too much of a chance to speak to Hiyashi, but at first glance he seems very serious. I suppose that he could be seen as good-looking, but it was hard to tell since he kept his face so expressionless. Maybe he is being forced into this too. Father says the engagement will be announced sometime next week and that there will be a party. As unhappy as I am with the situation, I will try to make best of the engagement party. Perhaps my husband-to-be will be more interested in talking if he has some sake in him. I certainly hope so. I don't want to marry a complete stranger, after all. Hinata picked at a pastry on the breakfast tray, feeling uncomfortable. It seemed that perhaps both her parents didn't approve of their match, at least to begin with. The next entry was dated for a week or so after the previous one. The engagement party was tonight. The first hour or so was extremely tedious. Several members of each clan gave speeches, and worst of all, I had to hold Hiyashi's hand the whole time. For someone with such a cold demeanor, he has very warm hands. We spoke more than I imagined we would, and it didn't even take any drinks to happen. It seems that Hiyashi is pleased with the match. Perhaps it makes it easier if you've always known that you will have an arranged marriage. Regardless, he seems a decent man. It is the very least I could hope for. Our wedding will be in the next half year. I don't really know what to say about this. It was after this entry that Hinata realized that there were only a couple pages left in the diary. She was suddenly struck by a strange terror that she might not know the end to her mother's story. With fear driving her, she quickly flipped the page to find a couple small entries describing some dates between her mother and her father as well as wedding preparations. They were short and relatively emotionless entries. She swallowed thickly. One page left. Today was my wedding day. It was a beautiful day out, and the Hyuga spared no expense making it a grand affair. I couldn't help but be excited. What girl isn't excited at least a little bit on her wedding day? I spent nearly the entire day getting prepared with several of the Hyugas serving women. The effect served me well. I could tell that Hiyashi was more than a little smitten by my bridal looks. The thing I was most afraid of was the kiss diary. I have been worried about this moment for quite some time. I was so nervous, far more nervous than the time in the forest with Soda. All with worry turned out to be for nothing. I was pleasantly surprised diary because there was still a weird tingle in my chest. It wasn't the same as the first one with my former teammate, but it was a deeper, slower sort. I suppose that I've been so wrapped up in how unhappy I was with my father's decision that I missed the plain fact that I do actually care for Hiyashi. I wouldn't say that I love him, but I do respect him. He is not exuberant, but he is at his core a kind man. I feel that I still have hope here. Perhaps I will find love after all. Hinata felt tears start to form in her eyes. She gently wiped the tears in her eyes away and flipped to the back side of the page. There was a final entry there, dated for a few months after the wedding. I am writing this note to you, diary, to say that it had taken some time, but I'm very happy. I have one last secret to tell you. I'm with child. I haven't told Hiyashi yet, although I'm sure that he will be as thrilled as I am. I have a very deep feeling that this child will be special. I don't think I had known the meaning of love until I learned of her existence. Oh, silly me. I feel strongly that the child is a girl, although time may still prove me wrong. Perhaps the biggest secret of them all is that this perfect child within me will have parents who love one another. I haven't yet told my husband of this either. I suppose he can find out all the good news at once, so that even his steady demeanor will be shaken up. This is my final entry, diary, as after this I will have to find a new leather-bound writing companion. Thank you for being a constant friend. I shall treasure you always. A few tears escaped Hinata's light lavender eyes and landed on the back cover of her mother's journal. It meant a lot to her that her childhood memories weren't falsified with youthful idealism. Her parents had really cared about one another. She wished that her mother could see that she had given her daughter the one thing she needed right now, hope for the future. Her mother's situation seemed so much less fair than her own, and she had still found happiness within her life. A smile crossed Hinata's face as she thought of her crush. She didn't think that she would ever forget about him, and she still felt as if her heart couldn't be shared by another man. But she did feel that she could perhaps find happiness despite these things. Her mother's story was a fantastic reminder that the world works in mysterious ways and that she really didn't know yet what her life would hold. For the first time in many weeks, Hinata felt at peace. Placing her mother's journal onto her table and the breakfast tray on the ground, the kunoichi lay back on her bed as the late morning sun washed over her. With the sun filtering into the room, she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep with a wide smile still etched on her face. Jiraiya stretched as he sauntered into the next village. This village was a particularly good one. It had not one but two seedy establishments that catered to his more unrefined tastes. In fact, he was looking forward to stopping here all week. It was his favorite spot to stop and let loose before he headed onward to Uzushiogakure, where he had to be the picture of sagely dignity. Well, maybe just marginally more dignified. The Toad Sage went to Uzushio several times a year to check in with and help train his godson, the daimyo of Uzushio. It had been 3 years since the boy had left Konoha, and sometimes he still found his mouth agape at the turn of events. He was one of the few people in Konoha who knew what had happened to the orphan Naruto. Naruto's whereabouts were a village secret, something that he and Tsunade had argued over sake about many times. The Hokage argued that it was for Naruto's and Uzushio's safety, but Jiraiya was mildly suspicious about the whole thing. After all, if Uzu and Konoha were ever going to be allies again, the secret would come out almost instantly. For the time being this hadn't happened. Uzushio was mostly lying low and rebuilding, but to Jiraiya, it seemed an unpleasant eventuality. The sage ninja frowned. He wasn't supposed to be thinking about this crap until after he left his private paradise village. He twisted his little finger in his ear as if to clear out the wayward thoughts and continued on into the downtown core. The sun was mostly set, and a few of the keenest establishments already had lanterns lit. The aging sage sped up as he traced the familiar route to Mikia's. It was only an hour or so later that Jiraiya, surrounded by lovely young ladies, all of whom were rather scantily dressed and plying him with booze. He was in the middle of telling the all-female entourage a story about his fantastic travels when his ears picked up something unexpected: gossip. Well, gossip itself wasn't rare, nor was his highly tuned spies' ears catching the gossip. It was the topic. He couldn't help but listen to the conversation after Uzushio had been mentioned. With a silly smile still glued to his face, the sage listened in on the conversation between two barmaids. Heard 'bout it too. An older, gruff-looking lady asked her cohort. Yeah, it's totally freaking me out. Ghosts. The younger woman shivered, as if a ghost had just chilled the room. People been sayin' them kids came from the Isle o' Uzu. Died then came back to see their families, without a voice to speak. Eep. Quit telling me all this, I'll never sleep again. The server flapped her tray at the other one to prove her seriousness. At this point, Jiraiya gave up on the gossip entirely. Rumors of Uzushiogakure being haunted were hardly rare, seeing as how it was abandoned for half a generation. He sighed slightly, finding himself thankful that it wasn't actually something that needed some investigating. Tuning out the vapid servers, he turned his full attention back to the more vapid floozies. He was falling behind on his relaxation schedule. A game of catch-up was in order. The sage threw himself into his activities with a little more zest, feeling confident that no more gossip about Uzu would get in his way. When Jiraiya awoke, the only light filtering into the room was from the moon, and even that made his head pound. Most of the women that he had been drinking with were gone, but a handful of them were sleeping on the cushions around him. His vision was a little bit blurry as he stumbled to the back of the room, and he swore under his breath as he found the door to the back of the establishment locked. The bathroom was back there, and he needed to piss bad enough that he had woken up in this state. Still grumbling, he picked his way through the maze of shapely bodies to get out the front door. The fresh air seemed to clear up his vision a bit, and feeling a bit steadier, he made his way around to the back of the building. The bar was situated so that the back faced the dense forest that surrounded the town. It was kind of oddly positioned, but he wasn't one to complain, since it meant he didn't need to pee on the dusty street. A heavy sigh escaped him as he emptied his full bladder into the bushes. He had never been so thankful that someone had forgotten to lock a door. His senses sharpened slightly when he heard the quiet snap of a few twigs. His stomach churned from drink as he held his breath. There was a flash of movement to his left and Jiraiya was just fast enough to see a small form circle behind him. He turned to follow the phantom, and reacted just in time to grab a skinny wrist armed with a kunai. He ced his tongue. "You're no ghost." The child before him had a curious expression on his face, and was dressed head to toe in pale gray shinobi attire. The boy couldn't have been older than 10, yet he did have some skill, enough to catch the toad sage himself somewhat off guard while he was taking a drunken piss. "What's your name, kid? And why are you swinging a kunai at me?" Ing his head to the side, the boy said nothing. A small shiver ran through the older ninja. The kid didn't seem to care much that he was caught. In fact, his expression didn't make it look like he cared much about anything. The kid's eyes glinted in the moonlight, revealing nothing. "Damn it, kid, I've had too much drink and I just need to go back to sleep, so just let me know why you're running around in a forest playing ninja already." The mysterious boy again said nothing but shook his head. "Really?" Jiraiya sighed again at the display. "Do you want me to put you into a toad's mouth?" That's an option looking more appealing by the moment. Ah. The boy had begun to open his mouth, but something off, really off. The boy's tongue slid farther out of his mouth than should have been possible, and it was covered in pulsating veins that were large enough that they could be seen easily, even in the relatively dim lighting of the moonlight. Black lines of ink sprouted from the center of the kid's mouth. Like the crack of a whip, the elongated tongue flew at Jiraiya's face, and only years of training on Mount Myoboku allowed him to catch the mutated appendage. The owner of the tongue shrieked as Jiraiya held it tightly in between his fingers and inspected the still visible lines of script. He recognized the root of the Fuinjutsu. It was a very advanced seal, one that copied memories and information from another person's brain. It was also a technique that had been banned and black booked due to the damage it did to both the caster and the victim. It was commonly placed on hands or feet, but to place it in a child's mouth seemed unspeakably cruel. The child began writhing as if in pain. With great deliberation, the Sanin let go of the kid's tongue. The cursed part of the child's mouth returned to its hiding spot, and moments after, the boy shrieked again. It was a shrill, unnatural howl, and it was followed by silence. Dropping to his knees, the gray-clad child gurgled once or twice and went limp into the dew-covered grass. Swearing again, the toad sage flipped the child face up. A couple small trickles of blood ran from the boy's mouth and his eyes were glassy. Jiraiya shook his head as he closed the glassy eyes and in his own mind, denounced the hatred of the world he lived in. Working very carefully, he summoned sealing paper and began working to make a copy of the dreaded seal within the kid's mouth. It was difficult work at the best of times, and in the dark of the early morning while still saturated with sake, it was damn near impossible. It took him much longer than it usually would have, but by the time the sun was rising, he had a workable copy of the horrific jutsu stowed away. His white hair glinted in the early morning sun as he stood up and dusted his knees off. It was time to leave for Uzushio. There was absolutely no time to waste. Any suspicions that he may have held about the current elders and councilmen in Uzu had been inflamed tenfold because far too much of the seal that he had worked on all night was based in traditional Uzu Fuinjutsu. So just who had put that demonic seal in the mouth of an innocent? Naruto wiped the sweat off his brow with the back of his hand and retook his stance in front of the blue pool in front of him. With a deep breath in, he turned his focus back on the center of the water. At first, nothing happened, but after a half a minute the center of the water started to spin and soon it was dipping inwards on itself to make a small whirlpool. His blonde eyebrows twitched as he forced more chakra into the maneuver. In response, the whirlpool grew nearly twice as large, with choppy waves splashing over the edges of the pool, wetting his sandals. Soon after it grew, it began to take on an oblong shape. All of a sudden, it destabilized completely and water went everywhere, thoroughly soaking Naruto in the process. Pulling his shirt off over his head, he began to wring the water out of his shirt. Hearing footsteps approaching behind him, he slipped the still damp shirt over his head again, hoping to hide the little mishap. You need to focus on the stability of the maelstrom, Naruto, not the size. Naruto turned to see Irie coming around the corner into the part of the gardens that was filled with training ponds. Watching that, he said with a chuckle. Irie nodded, and then began moving her hands in tandem. The water slipped from his clothing and off the ground surrounding the pool and formed into a large ball that then smoothly dropped back into the pond with only a ripple. Overall, I think that training's been going well. Look how big this bad boy is. Naruto turned his focus to his hand and felt the familiar rush of chakra. A Rasengan formed in his right hand, and it was at least 3 times larger than the ones he used to make when his godfather had just taught him the technique. Pervy Sage is going to have his mind blown. The auburn-haired Kunoichi's eyebrows rose. You'll have a chance to tell him a little sooner than you think. She trailed off and motioned towards the castle with her head. A small flare of excitement lit in the young shinobi's chest and he followed Irie back into the castle. Pervy Sage was early. That seemed too good to be true, to the point of being unheard of. Naruto knew about his godfather's mini vacations in the last town before the harbor port that ferried people to Uzu. What had happened to get him past there so quick? Naruto was still speculating that perhaps Jiraiya had run out of money for alcohol, when entered the main greeting hall to see his tall, white-haired mentor. As soon as Naruto saw him, his previous speculations were abandoned to his excitement about improving one of his trademark techniques. Yo, Pervy Sage, wait until you see this. His mentor cut him off. No, you just wait, till I show you something. He winked at Irie and nudged the blonde. Pictures. Loads of them. But let's go up to your room first. At this, the Kunoichi made a face, turned on her heel and left the area with her arms crossed. Naruto looked guiltily between the two adults, but before he could speak, the Toad Sage grabbed him by the wrist and started dragging him off towards the nearest stairwell. Hey, I can walk there myself, old man, quit that. Jiraiya let go of his arm, but still continued to march towards Naruto's room. When they arrived, Naruto's mentor started speaking loudly about teaching him a new sealing technique. Now, the young ruler watched as Jiraiya did a 14-prong silence seal on the room. Once the seal was in place, the sage let out a sigh of relief and Naruto let out a grunt of annoyance. I already know that seal. What's the deal here? And, do you really have some pictures to show me? He asked with a slight blush heating up his face. The more wizened face looked incredulous. Wah, pictures? No, I don't have that for you. Look, kid, we don't have much time here before people realized I'm not showing you a technique or pervy pics. I'm just gonna come out and say this. You need to look into some serious shit under your doorstep. Has the council granted you any more leeway in taking over the actual leadership of Uzu? Naruto felt distinctly uncomfortable at the question. No, he said finally, with blatant annoyance on his face. They said I have to at least wait until my 17th birthday. He had had that particular discussion fairly recently with the council that was overseeing his people until he was old enough to take over. It hadn't exactly gone as he had planned. Jiraiya shook his head, sending his bushy hair flying. Younger people have held the position before. I think they're stalling, Naruto. It's easy for a group like that to get used to power, you know. I think you better assert your rights to rule and you better do it damn quick. Their eyes met and Naruto could see that there was something that Jiraiya was holding back, and it was something that had rattled even him. Whatever it was, it had worried him enough for the sage to come to Uzushio almost a full week early. Blue eyes gazed downward. In the back of his mind, Naruto had gotten the same feeling. He heard a rumor or two about the town that the council had held a meeting without him. At the time, he figured it was just that, rumors. But now, he couldn't be so sure. Blonde eyebrows came together defiantly. I'll tell them that I'll be taking over some of the duties at the next council meeting. There was a pregnant pause. But Pervy Sage, do you think I'm actually ready for that? Jiraiya looked down at his godson very seriously. You'll have to be. But don't worry. You're your parents' son. Jiraiya's large, calloused hand dropped onto Naruto's head and ruffled his already manic hair. Naruto felt buoyed by the praise and watched while Jiraiya dropped the seal. The time had come a little bit earlier than he had expected, but he wasn't about to let anyone down. He let out a breath he didn't notice he was holding. It was time to start truly being a leader, but he was definitely ready for the challenge. The next meeting was supposed to be next week, but he decided that moving that date up himself by a few days would frame the announcement nicely. In the meantime, Naruto had a really awesomely large Rasengan to show his godfather. It was very late and very cold in the area that Hideaki and Danzo had agreed to meet. On the northeast side of a remote mountain face, there was a large cave. The cave itself had been modified to be a more comfortable meeting place, but try as anyone might, the biting cold of the outside weather couldn't be fully blocked out. Hideaki had arrived first, and so he sat in the chill, fending off the cold with hot tea. His old bones ached slightly in the less than favorable weather. The old soldier looked around at the men he had with him. He was only allowed to bring 3 trusted men with him, if one didn't count a package that he was dropping off with Danzo. Hideaki had only met up with Danzo a handful of times since their exchange regarding the Uzumaki boy. The old man turned his head to the side considering that particular deal. It had been working out perfectly so far. The boy seemed to trust him and the council well enough, and he trusted Irie completely. Not that Irie knew any of the real details. Hideaki could see the look in his goddaughter's eyes when she had asked him for permission to continue training the boy. Naruto had won her heart over in a very short time, which was actually a good asset for a leader. She had been allowed to do this, however, but only due to the fact that Irie was both a strong patriot and quite an accomplished teacher. She had been at the top of her classes for being an educator, only to find out after graduating that Kuso wouldn't allow a kunoichi originally from another village to be a teacher at their academy. Hideaki ran his hand through his close-cropped hair. That disappointment was probably what had made Irie so easy to draft in the first place. Uzushio's old military man was pulled from his thoughts as Danzo and his handful of people arrived. This is a damned inconvenient place for an old cripple like me to get to, Hideaki. Hideaki let out a wheezy chuckle. He knew damn well that Danzo wasn't as feeble as he looked. It'll be worth it, Danzo. Sit down. I bought something you asked for. The old warhawk and his men sat around the creaking wooden table. You asked me if I had something to help take care of that problem of yours, Hideaki started, and I have just the thing. A small, mousy-haired child was brought forward. The Uzushio councilman glanced to one of his soldiers. Show him. With an uncomfortable swallow, the man did as he was told and opened the girl's mouth to show Danzo what he was getting. There was a collective gasp when the long, ink-covered tongue was exposed. The grim corners of Danzo's mouth turned up. Interesting. Hideaki waved his hand lazily and another man took the child to the back of the room again. It's a combination of several seals. If that tongue makes contact with anyone's head, a large amount of their memories will be absorbed and copied. It will also kill the recipient if there is long enough contact. A useful feature, to be sure. The red-haired shinobi continued, there is one more feature of note. If anyone looks upon the seal for a long enough amount of time, the seal will kill the host. It goes without saying the child is unable to speak, but this way, even with mind-share jutsus, the identity of the master is protected. Danzo folded his good and bad hands together. So then, my friend, what is that you want in return for this treasure? The other man's lined face pulled into a grin. Consider it compensation for giving me the Uzumaki boy. Besides, it won't be long until we're both leading our respective countries from the comfort of the shadows. It's time for us to officially begin to make Konoha and Uzushio allies again. It is better to start now, because when our true military might comes to light, our neighbors are sure to be less than welcoming of it. The bandaged man pondered the words of his colleague. You might be right. Do you have a plan in mind for this yet? Shaking his head, Hideaki answered. I don't quite want to out the identity of our daimyo yet, so the easiest course of action is complex. Let us both think about it. We can contact each other early if the situation necessitates. The two men peered at each other. Dare I ask where you came up with this seal? Looking wry, the red-haired shinobi shook his head again. Let's just say I've been outsourcing a bit, and leave it at that. Black eyebrows raised, but Danzo said nothing. Instead, he stood, followed closely by his men. Until our next meeting, he said with a slight nod. At that, the group of root operatives left the cave along with the cursed girl, leaving Hideaki and his men alone to ponder about the next steps to be taken. Naruto stood outside the main audience chamber, with his heart hammering in his chest. He only had a few more minutes until the meeting, which he had moved up to today on his own authority. Taking a few calming breaths, the young blonde tried to relax. Everything had been planned by himself and his godfather to give him the best advantage, and besides, what could the council do? According to the laws of Uzushio, and several cases of precedence, he was old enough to take command of his people. At Jiraiya's suggestion, Naruto was wearing some of his finest clothing, and even he had to admit, he looked pretty intimidating. He swallowed, focusing on keeping his face serious. It made him look older and more decisive. It was a practiced visage, and he hoped that it would help his case with the council. Discover more. Books. Books and literature. The time for the meeting arrived, and Naruto swept into the room with his white and orange jacket flapping silently behind him. He was careful to keep his facial expression hard as he glanced along the row of counselors. He walked past them and took his seat at the head of the table. The head counselor, Hideaki, was the first to speak. What is so urgent that your highness felt the need to up the meeting time so suddenly? The blonde ruler was careful to keep his face serious. He didn't particularly like the man's tone, but he didn't remark on this. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, Counselor Mizushima. It's just a matter that I didn't think could wait for next week. He paused for a moment to look down the table before continuing into a somewhat rehearsed monologue. I have decided that I'm ready to begin taking over my duties as ruler. I am very grateful for the guidance and help that the council has provided for me since I was inaugurated. You have all worked very hard for the good of Uzushiogakure, and it will be rewarded. I know I am young still, but with your excellent guidance instilled in me, I think I will be successful. After his short speech ended, there was a moment of silence before anyone spoke. When would you like to begin to assume responsibility, my lord? Counselor Hamasaki asked in a thin voice. The young ruler didn't waver. Monday. I would like reports from each of you about your various areas of management ready for next week so they can be discussed in detail at that time. The estate staff has already been informed. The formal announcement to the people will be for the week after next. Most of the counselors looked stunned, and a handful were eyeing him somewhat darkly. Are there any other matters that any of you would like to bring forward? The table remained silent. Naruto nodded curtly. Okay then. This meeting is adjourned. I look forward to next week's discussion. Naruto pushed himself up from the ornate seat at the head of the counseling table and strode out of the room without looking back. The great wooden doors closed behind him, but he kept his swift pace until he had reached his quarters. Discover more. Books. Books and literature. Once safely behind the walls of his room, he leaned against his closed door, letting the serious expression slide. His face felt stiff. Keeping that serious look up was hard work. But the aching face was worth it. Everything had gone more or less the way that he and his godfather had planned it. The council was fairly stunned, and didn't have an argument prepared to present. By the time Monday rolled around, it would be a little bit late for them to begin questioning his decision. It might seem as if they were questioning his authority, and if something arose, he was definitely going to frame it as such. Naruto slipped his white and orange jacket off and hung it up in a wardrobe not far from the entrance to his quarters. This left him in his nicest black long-sleeved shirt and pants set. It was expensive fabric, but it was also plainly cut. In fact, most of his clothes were of a simple design. He didn't ever want to wear something that would impact his ability to fight, and after a mishap with the first royal tailor, he had worked with the newly hired one to create some clothes that he thought gave off the right vibe. To him, that meant nicer versions of typical shinobi clothes and jackets of various colors that were not so loosely based on the fourth Hokage's legendary coat. Thinking about the upcoming responsibility was making Naruto excited and mildly nervous at the same time. He decided that spending some pent-up energy training would be the perfect way to ease his mind. He stripped the fine black clothes off and tossed the wardrobe doors open. At the back was his original training suit, looking worse for the wear but still whole. It had been several months since he had last worn it. Irie switched all of his classes to stealth training when he wore it, and while he was thankful for his current stealth skills, other classes were far more interesting in his opinion. Irie was on a short mission to the mainland to pick up some new refugees, so he would be training alone. With a wide grin, he pulled the suit out of the back and flipped the jacket over his shoulders. He slipped his arm into the sleeve and, it got stuck. He frowned and tugged his arm back out. Had it really been that long since he had worn it? He thought back, and recalled that the last time he had worn it, which was quite a while ago, it was already getting a bit snug. He sighed, guessing that his most recent growth spurt had finished the job of rendering the beloved garment unwearable. He gingerly placed the jacket back on the hanger and pulled out the brightest other orange clothes he could find. Today's training session would be a memorial to his childhood training suit. Dressed in a bright orange shirt and burnt orange pants, he leapt off the balcony towards the training grounds. The wrinkles on Hideaki's face deepened into harsh lines as a scowl formed. That damned brat of a ruler. How dare he pull such a ridiculous stunt? The uncomfortable truth was that out of nowhere, Naruto had twisted the situation to force the council to give him back some of his power. Hideaki was certain that the farce of council meeting wasn't solely Naruto's doing, but he wasn't entirely sure of who had helped him. His first thought had been his own goddaughter, but he quickly discounted this. Doubtless she cared about the boy, but she was a strong patriot, and wouldn't want Naruto to begin leading unless she thought he was ready. Irie had given him no indication of this. Besides, this had transpired while she was away on a mission. Hideaki's mind worked far faster than those of the other counselors, most of whom still sat back in their seats, thoroughly shocked at the afternoon's events. What are we going to do? One of them finally asked, breaking the silence of the room that had began when the great wooden door slammed shut. Discover more. Books and literature. Books. The question wasn't directed at Hideaki himself, but he presumed to answer for all of them. The answer, of course, is we must distract him. If we can get him to lose this bizarre sudden focus on leadership, we may still be able to regain total control. But right now he does have us at a disadvantage. We were unprepared for an event like this at this point in the game, and now if we try to reassert control by force, he could easily have us tried for treason. That is more easily said than done, Hideaki. How do you propose we distract him? He is a young man, not a child. The head counselor spoke with confidence. Exactly, he said, with a cryptic smile. What is the best way to distract a teenage boy? The question hung in the air for a moment. The answer, of course, is a girl. That is our best bet at properly distracting someone of his age, Hideaki said, answering his own question. Besides that, if he has someone close enough to him that he cares about, this also gives us an opportunity for leverage. A few of the counselors looked mildly uncomfortable at this suggestion but said nothing. What exactly are you planning to do? One of them asked scathingly. Have a celebration and throw kunoichi and civilian maids at him? Nothing so crass. I propose an arranged marriage to strengthen an alliance with an allied nation. He can hardly say no to this, as it is something that our country legitimately needs. And whether or not he cares for the women, an engagement to a stranger will definitely be a distraction. This is especially true for our young daimyo, as he hasn't had much contact with people his own age in a number of years. The other counselors began nodding their heads at this plan as they thought it through themselves. Uzushiogakure was at the stage in their redevelopment that an alliance would be necessary. They weren't far from announcing themselves on the world stage, and without a larger supporting nation, who was to say that their previous enemies wouldn't return for a second time? It also helped that traditionally, the council did have a hand in picking the consorts of the previous daimyo, especially in cases where there wasn't older family members in the picture. It seemed that in this matter, precedence was on their side. Did you have a country in mind, Hideaki? The veteran shinobi nodded, thinking back to his previous conversation with Danzo. It was time to call in a favor on that front. The informal meeting in the wake of the daimyo's announcement was thus concluded and Hideaki hurried to his hidden office. It was time to send Danzo a message. The next meeting of theirs would have to be far quicker than either of them had imagined that it would be. Sealing a message in Fuinjutsu to the side of one of his personal carrier birds, he sent the creature on its way. He also began issuing instructions to a few of his most trusted men to find out who was behind helping Naruto with his little scheme. Surely the boy could not have planned everything alone, and Hideaki wagered that it wouldn't be too difficult for his most trusted soldiers to track the culprit. He sat back in his chair contemplating the day's events and compiling a list of the requirements that would be needed for the daimyo's wife-to-be. She would need to be from a prestigious clan. She would also need to be someone who was weak-minded, someone that would be easily led, and not politically cunning. It would also be helpful if she was a water, wind, or lightning nature kunoichi, to ensure the purity of the daimyo's line. These things were a tall order to be sure, but he was confident in his cohort's abilities. He felt certain that Danzo could find someone from Konoha that would meet these somewhat stringent requirements. As for the lady's family, well, what clan leader wouldn't want their daughter in a political marriage with a daimyo? Hinata awoke from a deep sleep and stretched in bed, feeling content. She sunk comfortably into her bed for another minute or so, until the realization of what day it was dawned on her. The air was ed out of her lungs. Today was the final spar. This evening, the Hyuga clan would officially have their heiress. The dark-haired kunoichi flipped over in bed and tried to control her breathing with her face in the pillows. In through the nose, out through the mouth, she repeated to herself. She wasn't sure why she was so anxious, as she was the only person in the compound who knew for sure who was going to win the match. The past few spars, Hinata had purposefully gone almost all out against her little sister. Hanabi still won most of the matches, but Hinata took a couple wins as well. This was primarily for her sister's benefit. Hanabi might never forgive her if she found out that her beloved elder sister lost their most important spar on purpose. She let a heavy sigh escape her lips. It was time to face her destiny and the burden that she was taking over from Hanabi. Steeling her resolve, she got out of bed and dressed herself in her best training gear. Hinata took as much time as possible as she prepared herself. Eventually though, there was nothing else that she could conceivably do before leaving her room. She glanced around her room until her eyes fell onto her pillow. She swallowed a thick lump in her throat. Hinata walked slowly over to her bed and pulled her notebook out. She flipped to the last page and her heart skipped a beat as she reread her childhood scrawl. If she beat Hanabi in the spar, there might still be some hope for her and the only boy she'd ever loved. But Hanabi's fate couldn't be hinged on the slim chance that she'd meet Naruto again and that he'd somehow return her affection. No, this was her final goodbye to that potential life. I'm sorry, Naruto. Hinata closed the book and placed it on her bed, not bothering to hide it under the pillow. A sense of peace washed over her, and she quietly left her room, closing the door behind her. The feeling of tranquility didn't leave her as she headed toward the practice chamber with determined steps. At the outset, Hanabi would be secure in her new position as heiress to the Hyuga in a little over an hour. Soon, all of her fears for the future of her little sister would be wiped clean. There was still a small part of her that was terrified that her father would change his mind and have her sealed, although she fought hard to remind herself that he had already stated to the council that whoever didn't lead the clan would be placed into an arranged marriage. She arrived at the training room and entered quietly. There weren't many people there. Her father, her sister, Neji, and the head of the branch family was there. There were also a few of the more experienced elders in the room as well. All in all, there were probably around 10 people who were preparing to watch the fight. Hanabi was the first to approach her, with an uncharacteristic serious expression. The younger Hyuga pulled the older one into a tight hug. "Do your best, Hinata," she whispered before pulling away. Hinata nodded at her sibling's words, before glancing at her father. He gave her a curt nod, nothing more. The two sisters faced one another and bowed before taking their gentle fist taijutsu stances. Both activated their bloodlines, and awaited the signal from their father to begin the spar. It seemed to Hinata that they stood at the ready for ages without hearing the starting signal, when in reality it was only 30 seconds or so. The afternoon already felt very surreal. Begin. Both of the sisters stood still for a moment after the word from their father, preparing themselves before moving. The girls seemed to spring to life at the same moment. They rushed each other, with Hanabi's speed slightly superior. Hanabi struck first, aiming a sharp jab toward her older sister's torso. Hinata deflected the attack, as well as the second one that Hanabi aimed at her face. For a minute or two, the spar was primarily Hinata blocking and deflecting her younger sister's furious advance, but once she was embroiled in the fight, Hinata began to see Hanabi's movements a little more clearly and began a counterattack. At first it was only a small swipe here and there in between blocking her sister's attacks, but soon the strength of strikes increased. Hinata finally saw a decent opening in her sister's defensive stance and unleashed an open-fisted strike at Hanabi's forehead. Hanabi saw it coming just in the nick of time, but had to disengage completely from the fight to dodge it. She leapt backwards, sliding to a stop with one knee and one hand on the ground. Hanabi remained crouched on the ground and made an odd throwing motion. It took a moment for her elder sister to see the nearly invisible chakra needles in the air. Hinata didn't really have a way to dodge the barrage, so she took a gamble on a technique that she was just starting to learn the basics of. Throwing as much of her chakra behind it as she could, Hinata attempted to release the 8 trigrams vacuum palm technique. The blast that she released was relatively weak and unstable. It likely wouldn't have damaged an opponent, but it did disrupt the chakra of the needles enough to disperse them. Hanabi jumped from her crouched position towards Hinata and aimed a downward punch that Hinata sidestepped away from. This left the younger Hyuga's defense open once again for her sister to take advantage of. Like before, the strike was blocked at the last moment and soon the fight had returned to how it had begun, with both girls attacking and deflecting attacks in close quarters combat. Hinata felt butterflies in her stomach. It was nearly time for her to use her special move. She had practiced and prepared this footwork for the past 3 years, and now it was time to use it. Worries of her father or Neji seeing that she had lost on purpose flashed through her mind, but she tried to ignore them. Hinata took a few steps back as her sister advanced. She slid her foot sideways a couple millimeters, and unlocked her knee joints, twisting slightly as she blocked Hanabi's latest attack. The force from Hanabi's blow and her carefully destabilized footwork resulted in Hinata being knocked to the ground. Her younger sister was instinctively fast, and within moments the match was over. Hanabi's wide eyes looked over the fist pointed at her older sister's face, filling with tears. Hinata swallowed the lump in her throat and smiled weakly at her little sister. Matched to Hanabi. The area erupted into noise, but it seemed muffled to the two siblings, who hadn't yet moved from their final positions in the fight. A couple of tears fell from Hanabi's eyes as she stood up straight. Hinata surprised herself with how composed she felt. She didn't feel the familiar swelling of tears in her eyes, nor did she feel lightheaded or faint. The only thing she really felt was relief. It was done. Hanabi was the next heiress. Several clan members converged on Hanabi, quietly cheering and leading her off to make preparations for next week's ceremony that would instate Hanabi as the official heir to the Hyuga clan. The group left with her younger sister and they were closely followed by the rest of the spectators. Hinata's father was the last person to leave. She glanced up at him from her seat on the floor, expecting his usual harshness. Instead, she saw that Hishi wore a very particular look. He stared at her for a moment, but soon turned to leave like the others. As he left the room, her composure cracked slightly. She had expected her father to be disappointed and maybe reprimand her as he usually did when she lost a spar against her younger sister, so what had that strange look been about? She bit her lip. Did her father suspect something? She quickly discounted this. He wouldn't have stayed silent on the matter when the two of them were alone. Hinata got up off the sparring room floor and dusted off her knees. She had the rest of the day off to rest, but she had already made plans with Shino and Kiba. They were eagerly awaiting her arrival to find out the details of the fight. They would be disappointed to hear of the outcome, but her friends always knew the right thing to say to lift her spirits. With a final sad smile, Hinata left the sparring room and gently closed the door behind her before heading off to meet up with her teammates. I still can't believe you did that, Naruto, Irie said, as she straightened the collar on Naruto's jacket. Irie had been back from her mission to the mainland for over a week, but she still hadn't let her charge off the hook for doing something as outlandish as taking back control over the Isle of Uzushio at the tender age of 16. For his part, Naruto hadn't commented much on the goings-on that had caused him to take such drastic action. He trusted that Irie wanted to do the right thing for him and for her country, but he wasn't sure if he should trust her with the warnings that Pervy Sage had given him. Naruto didn't like to think about it, but he did know that his head tutor had ties to the leader of the council. It pained him to leave her out of the loop that had been created by himself and his godfather, but he didn't yet know who he could trust with the information. Discover more. Books and literature. Books. The young ruler also suspected that part of the reason that Irie was still commenting about it so negatively was that she was hurt that he hadn't been forthcoming about his plan. It made him uncomfortable to say the least, and he was hoping that after today's announcement to the people, Irie would finally forgive him and just focus on helping him do his job properly. Naruto's first long and in-depth council meeting had gone surprisingly well. The reports that were put together by all the various counselors had been perfectly laid out and all of the council members seemed extremely eager to help him understand the documents. In fact, the demeanor of the council in general had been a complete turnaround from the previous meeting when he had made his declaration. He was thankful for their help because even with all of his specialized tutoring, some of the information had been confusing, but something about the meeting still ate at him. They were almost too eager to help him. Perhaps they had a new plan that had been formulated behind his back. Naruto didn't expect that his rallying against the council would be without consequences, but so far that seemed to be the case. Initially it made him nervous. He felt as if he was in a constant state of wariness, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. This changed as the time drew closer to his public announcement. It had been a couple weeks and nothing much had happened. Maybe Pervy Sage had overestimated how dirty the council really was. Regardless, the day of the announcement was upon him and Naruto was feeling positive. In the back of his mind, he felt a little bit victorious for making it this far, although he did admit he wasn't out of the clear yet. Irie stood back from fiddling with Naruto's jacket collar, which jolted him back to reality. She looked him over. Well, you look absolutely regal. Do you remember the speech we went over? Don't forget to do a slight bow at the end. And definitely don't leave the balcony until the council given their short speech either. It'll send the wrong impression to the people. Irie trailed off as she noticed her daimyo grinning at her with an eyebrow raised. But you already knew all that, didn't you? Naruto nodded, feeling a little bit smug. Yup. A genuine smile crossed the older woman's face and she placed a hand on the blonde's shoulder. You'll do great, Naruto. I'm still not sure I agree with what you're doing. You're so young, but I want you to know that I'll support you any way I can. Naruto beamed at these words, but before he could respond, a member of the estate staff came rushing into the room. Only a few minutes left before the announcement. My lord. Is my lord ready? Discover more. Books and literature. Books. The pair of shinobi nodded at the same time, and the frazzled-looking lady seemed to calm down slightly. All right then. I wish you good luck with the speech, my lord. Discover more. Books. Books and literature. The graying woman was gone as fast as she had come. Her presence had wound Naruto up a little bit more, and he felt his heart speed up in his chest. He peeked out a shuttered window and let out a small gasp. He had made a couple formal announcements in the past, but obviously none as large as this. The size of the crowd showed it. The formal square and even the paved streets towards the gardens and the city of Uzu proper were filled to the brim with a talkative crowd. There was a buzzing noise from the hundreds of conversations going on outside the window. Rather than making him more nervous, it made him excited. It was fantastic to see the amount of people that were now living in Uzushio. The return of refugees had been picking up speed in the last year, and the crowd outside was living proof of this. He had read the numbers off of a list and been slightly impressed by it, but to see it with his own eyes made him proud to be officially taking on the mantle as the ruling daimyo. He sure wasn't going to let all those people down. Straightening his collar, he stepped out onto the balcony to wild applause. Irie was relaxed, leaning against a pillar near the exit to balcony. She could almost hear the thoughts of the crowd by the collective noise that came and went. Fear and hope battled in her brain. She trusted that Naruto would be a good leader, someday. But she was still worried that he wasn't ready yet. She smiled and rubbed her temples. She'd just have to believe in Naruto, and stay close by to help until he was 100% ready to stand on his own 2 feet. An extra loud cheer ended Naruto's portion of the event. Irie let out a breath she hadn't noticed she'd been holding. It was done. Naruto was now the official daimyo of Uzushiogakure. There was no turning back now. The cheers of the crowds died down as the head counselors began making their speeches from next door. Irie wasn't sure exactly what they'd be speaking about, but she had heard so many speeches from the head counselors over the years that she wasn't concerned about missing anything. She had heard so many different variations of the same speech she could probably give one of them herself. The counselor's portion of the day's announcements had been underway for about 15 minutes when a second and far less expected cheer erupted from outside. Curious, Irie poked her head through the curtain to investigate. She could only see Naruto from behind. Hideaki had finished talking, but Naruto was very still. Crouching down, she crept further out, careful to stay where the crowds below couldn't see her. Naruto was very wide-eyed and mildly white-faced. A slight nod from him told her that he had noticed her. She gestured at him to smile and wave, then return indoors. His training over the years had paid off, because he did what he was told well enough that the cheers from the people never faltered as the announcements ended and Naruto moved back into the palace. His trained regal facade only lasted until he was safely out of the public eye. Once indoors, it quickly melted away in a flurry of nervous activity. Irie. I can't do it. I can't do it. I've never thought of. I'm too young for this, ya know. Irie was baffled at his sudden change in tune. Naruto, you can hardly back down from ruling now after the last couple weeks. No, not ruling, marriage. Wait, what are you talking about? Irie silently cursed herself for not paying attention to the previous announcements. The counselors, they announced our upcoming alliance with Konoha, which is to be strengthened by he faltered, marriage to a woman from one of the Konoha clans. The elder Nin felt her brow furrow. I see. The more she thought about it, the more it seemed like the council was exacting revenge on Naruto for his reckless decision to take over ruling. Her lips pressed into a line, announcing it without talking to Naruto or her first. Stay here. She left the room and marched down the hallway to the other balcony room. Hideaki. A word please. Her godfather did not look surprised at her, despite the lack of respect in her address. Perhaps we can go to my study for this discussion, Irie. he said bluntly. Discover more. Books and literature. Books. Anger still seething under her skin, Irie nodded. The walk was a tense one, with Hideaki not bothering to make small talk. The veteran shinobi pushed open the door to his study roughly, and Irie followed him in, closing with an equal lack of care. What seems to be the problem, child? Hideaki's words were made to sound caring and grandfatherly, but they didn't temper the sharpness in his eyes. What was that, godfather? It isn't like you to be so damn petty. The side of the older nin's lip twitched. You don't agree that the daimyo needs to strengthen the alliance between our sister nation via strategic marriage. 3/4 of the previous daimyo had such political arrangements. Irie wasn't going to argue with that. She too had long suspected that Naruto's eventual marriage would need to be one of political strategy and not love. But once again, her opinion was that Naruto was far too young to be dealing with this. That wasn't my argument, Hideaki, she said after a pause. But do you honestly think someone so young should be betrothed? He feels he's old enough to rule, therefore he must be old enough to accept the responsibilities that go with it. The sharpened edge of the counselor's words reached Irie, and suddenly the motive fell into place. Her anger renewed itself. So was that announcement punishment for Naruto, or to shame him in front of his people? Her words dripped with equal venom. Hideaki's scowl deepened. For a moment, the two shinobi glared at one another. Hideaki broke the silence. Naruto needed to learn that he shouldn't be crossing his valuable counsel. His words hung in the air. And you think your actions benefited Uzushiogakure? Truly. HHN, so you stand with your charge. I stand where I always have, with Uzushio. With that, Irie left to go find one of the lower counselors to tell her more details about their plan. Stay here. Irie turned on her heel and left Naruto in the announcement room. He had misbehaved enough in his youth to know the look on Irie's face meant she was seriously pissed off. She strode out of the room and slammed the door. Naruto assumed she was going to talk to the counselors. He did feel a little better knowing that Irie hadn't been one of the people planning this marriage. He swallowed a lump in his throat. He wasn't even comfortable thinking the word. It had been so long since he'd really thought about girls. Frankly, he'd been far too busy the last couple years to consider his romantic future. Naruto's crush on his Pinkett teammate had faded as he'd aged, particularly because he had been sure that he wouldn't have a chance with anyone from Konoha. Now when Sakura did cross his mind, it was as a friend and trusted comrade. For a split second he wondered if the medic nin was to be his arranged wife, but quickly discounted it. Sakura, while talented and Tsunade's apprentice, was not from one of the prominent ninja clans. The council would never have picked someone without being in the nobility. Discover more. Books and literature. Books. He started pacing to dispel some of the nervous energy consuming him. He wasn't sure of the time frame before his betrothed to be arrived in the city. He was certain that the council had done this purposefully. It was sending a message. Naruto sighed. Him and Pervy Sage had not expected something like this as a retaliation. Worse of all, his godfather had left on another intelligence gathering trip and wouldn't be back for a few weeks. He was on his own with this one. Try as he might, he couldn't really see a way out of this one. He hoped that Irie would have a better plan than him. He tried to stay positive. Perhaps it would be nice to have someone else around from his home village. Although he had learned to love his birthright, Konoha was still his hometown. Naruto would like to have someone around to reminisce with. Both his pacing and thoughts were interrupted as Irie came back into the room. It looked as if she had calmed down somewhat, but she also looked a little defeated. He suddenly felt younger than he had in a very long while. Well, Irie, do I have to? She looked down. Let's head back to your quarters to discuss it, Naruto. His tension returned worse than before. The pair silently retreated to Naruto's rooms, both embroiled in their own thoughts. Upon entering, Naruto pulled off his jacket, and tossed it on the bed. He didn't really need Irie to confirm his worst thoughts. He looked up at his teacher, and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling forlorn. There isn't a way to back out of it, is there? Irie's burgundy brows came together and she shook her head. I'm sorry, Naruto. The council planned this as a pretty ironclad way. And I get no say in this at all. His frustration and disappointment were starting to distill into anger. There is a precedent for the council to pick consorts for daimyo that don't have any immediate family. And as Hideaki so smugly pointed out to me, the great majority of the previous rulers have had marriages for political gain. The council isn't wrong in the sense that we do need to have a strong ally in one of the main shinobi nations to get our footing. I'm afraid they have already made a deal with one of the noble houses in Konoha. It's too late for us to stop it. Naruto hadn't felt so defeated since before just after the Chunin exams. We might be able to delay the wedding, Naruto. At least until you and the lady in question are older. But I'm afraid in 3 weeks' time the Konohagakure delegation is going to arrive, and during the Festival of Tides, they're going to make it official. The young ruler scowled. What difference does it make to wait? There isn't really a good age to marry a complete stranger. Irie sat down beside Naruto. Well, in theory, Konoha could break off the engagement first. It would be highly dishonorable or coarse. In fact, I highly doubt that any well-trained maid from a noble house would do that. Then why even mention it? His voice came out harshly, and Irie flinched. He jumped up off the bed. Naruto. Just leave it, Irie. I'm going out to clear my head. Without looking back at his tutor, Naruto broke into a run and hopped out of his bedroom window. He landed smoothly in a tree that grew just outside the window before dropping quietly to the ground. His journey started out at a full tilt run. The gardens around the palace blurred as he jumped over sculptures and bushes, heading out of the palace compound. He always felt better when he expended energy. Naruto slowed as he reached town. In the past couple years, huge progress had been made in rebuilding the city. The market district in particular looked more alive. Many of the buildings had been rebuilt and many merchants had once again taken up residence in the Uzushiogakure. Darkness was just starting to fall, and the lanterns in the marketplace were just starting to light the area with an orange-red glow. He was thankful for cover of darkness, since in his haste to leave the palace and his worries behind him, he hadn't even grabbed a cloak or a hooded jacket. He wasn't sure he was up to smiling for the people just now. He wandered through the thinning crowd, hands in his pockets and head facing down. This was it. 3 weeks and he was officially a sort of married man. He had held out some hope before that maybe the lady would be someone he knew. Someone that he could at least be friends with. But from what Irie said, it was going to be some stiff noble's daughter, who probably wouldn't know anything about shinobi ways. He sighed. He wondered what Jiraiya would do in this situation and then made a face as he realized his pervy godfather would probably keep making passes at floozies anyway. What would his parents have done? He really wasn't sure on that. Pervy Sage hadn't told him much about his parents' relationship, but he did know that they had wed out of love, not duty. That being said, Cage mostly had free reign over their choice to marry, unlike the daimyo. His mood didn't improve much as he strolled, but he did come to the sour conclusion that he could get by without love. Hadn't he done just that for the first 12 years of his life? It pained him to think of the times in his life when he was so devastatingly lonely. His situation had improved a lot since then. It's not like he would be without friends or companions. He still had Irie and his other tutors. Perhaps most importantly, he had his people. Looking up, he glanced around at the people in the city, all former refugees. Most went about their business, smiling, laughing, and getting some shopping done. He owed it to them to make sure the alliance with Konohagakure was strong enough that they never needed to leave again. Like the old man Hokage used to say, the village and for Naruto the whole country, were an extension of his family. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad if he had to give up this one small part of life to help Uzushio. Besides, he still remembered how much it stung to have Sakura pick Sasuke over him. He never wanted to experience that again. Now he would never have to. A sort of calmness washed over him as his decision to embrace this arranged marriage thing solidified in his mind. A smile crossed his lips as he turned to head back to the royal compound. He continued his peaceful people watching as he walked back through the marketplace. Naruto had almost reached the exit when a quiet voice cried out to him. My lord! Naruto forgot that he wasn't so hidden with his head held high. He turned, and found a woman staring at him, almost in disbelief. Yeah, that's me, Yano. He smiled at the woman, but she didn't return it. Do you know what happened to my boy? The woman's eyes glittered with unshed tears. Her heartfelt question created a rock in Naruto's stomach. What? You mean, they haven't talked with you about it? I guess not. What happened? The tears that were previously held interrupted. My little Nobu, my son, he's gone missing. I think he was kidnapped. Kidnapped? Where? Here in the city. Nobu was last seen leaving the academy. Naruto's heart skipped a beat. The kid wanted to be a ninja. Why would the council hide this from him? The grieving woman continued without prompt. He hasn't been seen in over a month. I've been to the council twice, but they don't have any leads. Naruto was confused. What possible reason would the council have for not looking into a missing person case on their very soil, especially a missing kid, unless someone on the council had a reason to not be addressing it? He wasn't sure how this fit into anything, but he had an unsettling feeling that this was related to what Pervy Sage had been worried about before. He looked at the woman. She was still weeping, and clutched something to her chest, which upon closer inspection was a picture of her son, Nobu. I promise you that I'll look into this, okay? The woman nodded and scribbled something down on some paper she had tucked into her coat and handed it to Naruto. It was an address. For in case you find him. The woman wiped her damp eyes on her sleeve and disappeared into the marketplace. The decent mood that Naruto had worked himself up to disappeared into turmoil. He felt more in tune than ever with what Jiraiya had been saying previously about problems on his doorstep. Suddenly, the issues surrounding his impending betrothal seemed far away. He pondered his godfather's warnings and the missing child as he finished his walk back to the daimyo compound. Maybe it was time for him to let Irie in on Pervy Sage's concerns. He was sure she'd be able to help him find out more about his missing boy. Hinata returned to the Hyuga compound, after a short mission with her team. It was the first that she had taken after the proceedings that officially put Hanabi in place as the heiress of the Hyuga. That has been well over a week prior, but she figured that the Hokage was simply being nice and leaving Hinata some time to process the events of the past month. Of course, Hinata was completely at peace. Hanabi was safe. She had accepted her fate as a token in the Hyuga political games. She had completed her mother's wish for at least one of her daughters. Despite the sorry looks that her friends had been giving her when they thought she wasn't looking, she was quite happy. The dust had finally settled and things were beginning to go back to normal. Hinata came inside, and carefully removed her coat. She was just about to head into her chambers to get cleaned up when her father entered the foyer. Hinata, I would like to speak to you in my office in the next hour. You may get cleaned up first. Hinata's face instantly reddened. Why yes, father. He turned and left, leaving Hinata vaguely shaken. She was certain her father must have news about her eventual husband. She had known for quite some time that she would eventually be facing an arranged marriage, but now there was a real possibility that it was just around the corner, and that frightened her more than she cared to admit. Still shaking, she went to her room and poured a bath. Normally Hinata found baths relaxing, but instead of clearing, her thoughts kept drifting back to the impending meeting with her father. She was sure that he was going to be talking to her about who the clan had chosen to wed her to. Was she really ready to give up her life as a ninja? What if she had to move to a different part of the land of fire, far away from all her family and friends? Her bath turned out to be far from soothing, so Hinata ended it quicker than usual to ready herself for the meeting. She dressed herself in a plain white dress and hurried to her father's study. She knocked on the door, and her father called for her to enter. Her heart was hammering as she closed the door behind her. Hiyashi's study always made her incredibly nervous. Eyes downcast, she entered the room, and knelt on the mats in front of her father. Father, you want tea to see me? Yes, Hinata, I did. He cleared his throat and had a sip of tea. He looked up at her, eyes hard. I wanted to know why the heiress of a prestigious clan would want to throw a spar for leadership over the clan. Hinata froze in horror. Her father knew. Her throat tightened up, and she couldn't get any words out to explain herself. I wanted to know why the heiress of a prestigious clan would want to throw a spar for leadership over the clan. Hinata froze in horror. Her father knew. Her throat tightened up, and she couldn't get any words out to explain herself. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend. She trailed off, but her father continued to stare. Take your time, daughter, but I do require a full and detailed explanation. This gave Hinata pause. Her father didn't seem particularly displeased. In fact, he wasn't displaying much emotion at all. If he was very angry, his eldest daughter could usually tell. Taking a deep breath, she tried to relax. Her father wanted a detailed explanation, but where to start with her story? It was something she had been working towards for so long. For several minutes, the pair sat in silence. Hinata glanced up at the Hyuga leader. I'm sorry, father. I need to apologize to you. A few years ago I overheard on your council meeting that whichever daughter didn't lead the clan was to be married off to further prospects for Hyuga. Hiyashi's mouth twitched, but he didn't say anything. He gestured for Hinata to continue. I knew that Hanabi would never prosper if that lot fell to her. She would go crazy if she had to give up being a shinobi. Besides, if a wedding fell through, and she received the sea-caged bird seal, I'd never be able to live with myself. So you decided to ensure your younger sister would win the match? Why, yes, sir, but it is important to me that Hanabi doesn't find out. I don't want her to worry about me or feel any sadness about the outcome of the match. Her father closed his eyes for a moment. I will not inform Hanabi. Although I noticed that something was off with the end of your match with her, we did not delay the proceedings. Even if I cared to change the outcome of things, I could not. Hinata felt the start of tears tingle in her eyes. So Hanabi is safe. Hiyashi's face softened slightly. Yes. Your sister cannot be removed as the heiress of the clan now. Thank goodness. Hinata was so relieved to hear that the Hanabi couldn't be changed as the clan head. It didn't matter if she was punished for her deception, her goal had been met. That brings us to a second order of business, Hinata. What are we to do with you? Hinata bit her lip. I accept any punishment you see fit for my deception. There was a second pregnant pause while Hishi had another sip of tea. Discover more. Books. Books and literature. That will not be necessary. Your transgression is not common knowledge and it shall remain that way. None of the other council members or elders were perceptive enough to catch the change in your footwork. Discover more. Books and literature. Books. The raven-haired kunoichi let a small smile play on her lips. Unless she was quite mistaken, her father had just complimented her subterfuge. I must be straightforward with you, my daughter. The council has come to an agreement as to who your husband shall be. Redness climbed to her cheeks. So she hadn't been completely wrong when she had been speculating earlier. Who? Konoha has recently been in talks to start an alliance with Uzushiogakure. To strengthen this newly formed bond, the council in the Uzushio capital city called upon the clans of Konoha to offer a suitably noble maiden for marriage with their daimyo. Hinata was speechless. She was to marry a daimyo. That meant two of her worst fears were likely to come true. She would have to move far from her family and would likely have to give up her life as a kunoichi. She tried her best to remain stoic for her father. It was her duty to her family and to Konoha to go through with this. She had known this was the likely price for giving up the ruling seat of her clan. I have done the best I could to ensure this would be a suitable match for you, Hinata, although it has been a somewhat rushed affair. From what I understand, the Uzushio daimyo is close to your age, and it does not need to be said that as a daimyo's wife you will be very well cared for. Hinata carefully maintained a neutral face, and nodded at her father's words. How long do I have left in Konoha, father? Our delegation leaves in 2 weeks' time. All right, Hinata stated in a quiet, yet final voice. Thank you, father, for arranging this. He looked slightly pained at this. Whatever you do, Hinata, do not thank me for this situation. Discover more. Books. Books and literature. Taking a final sip of tea, Hiyashi stood up, and Hinata followed his lead. I will provide you with more details tomorrow. Please meet me in my study at 8 o'clock. Discover more. Books. Books and literature. Why, yes, sir, I will. On those words, Hinata left her father's office, head spinning. Wandering back to her room, her mind mulled over the information her father had given her. She only had 2 weeks. This was much, much faster than she had anticipated. Her heart was pounding in tune with her head, so as she arrived at her quarters she decided to lay down. Tension and worry surrounded her as she pulled the blankets over herself. She had known this moment was coming for a long time, but what she didn't expect was how much the moment hurt now that it was here. Hinata awoke in the late evening with swirling images of a snowy forest and a deep red scarf in her head. She hadn't even realized that she had fallen asleep. It had been a long time since she dreamed about her first, and only, crush. With a heavy sigh, the raven-haired Kunoichi sat up in bed. Perhaps it was a sign. The compound was very quiet. In her haste to sleep away her stress, Hinata had neglected to ask anyone in the household to wake her, and as a result, it was now very late in the day and she was wide awake. Getting out of bed, she padded softly to the window. It was dark outside, but her stomach was grumbling enough that she decided to head out into the town to get food. She had most certainly slept through dinner. Pulling her lavender jacket over top of her clothes, Hinata set out underneath the blackened sky. The sky was darker over the Hyuga compound as the electric lights from the town placed a permanent pale glow above it. Hinata paused just outside the gates to absorb the sight. Her days in her hometown were numbered. She resolved to not forget a single detail of Konoha. Nervous energy fueled her walk, propelling her to the core of the city. The marketplace was still open, although it had certainly cleared out. Late shoppers milled around the stalls while Hinata walked past them, somewhat aimless. Out of the corner of her eye, she spied a place that she hadn't given any thought to in a long time, Ramen Ichiraku. Her footsteps slowed and her stomach growled again. The small noodle house was still open, so Hinata quietly slid onto one of the stools. She ordered a miso ramen and glanced around. It hadn't changed much. Slowly, the Hyuga nin ate her ramen and considered how often she used to hang around here as a child. She had always hoped to run into Naruto there. Her chopsticks hit the bottom of the bowl, and she noticed that she had missed a single piece of fish cake at the bottom. She frowned. It was as if the universe was torturing her by reminding her of the path she had given up. She paid for her meal and left feeling less anxious, but more defeated. Since her mood couldn't get any lower, Hinata decided to go to a place that she had avoided for over 3 years. She picked up her pace, and before long, she was on the mountainside above the carved Hokage. When she was a girl she used to come up here to be alone, but ever since she had spoken to Naruto that fateful night, it had been painful and dead opposite of relaxing. Looking out over the beautiful cityscape, Hinata sat down. For the first year after Naruto had left, she had wondered often where he had gone and if her words had encouraged him to leave. He could be anywhere in the world at this very moment. She was certain that he was making it a better place somehow. For one silly moment she imagined what Naruto would do if he were in her situation, but even her imagination couldn't take that seriously. There was no way someone like Naruto would ever get stuck in an arranged marriage. He'd change it if he didn't like it. Besides, the idea itself was so laughable that it managed to make her smile. Her thoughts drifted from there. She wondered what her future fiancé was like. It was hard to imagine being in a relationship with a stranger, especially one that was a civilian. Her life for such a long time was centered around training and improving her skills as a kunoichi. It seemed an insurmountable obstacle to give that up. Would she really be happy without continuing to work on improving herself? Determination crossed her face. She decided no matter what, she would keep her skills up, even if it meant training in secret after dark. In theory, it meant she could protect her betrothed. And if it was to protect the daimyo, how could anyone really be upset about it if they found out? This small act of planned rebellion buoyed her spirits. Hinata decided to keep this as her focus over the next few days as she prepared to leave Konoha. She wouldn't give up. She stayed on mountainside for another quarter of an hour before returning to the Hyuga compound. Hinata had a lot of people and places to say goodbye to, but she'd have to start tomorrow. She needed to try and sleep for a few hours at least before she met her father the following morning. Hiyashi waited by the coach for his daughters to finish saying their goodbyes. The trip to Uzushio was a fairly long one when they had so many things to pack, including Hinata's belongings and supplies to supplement the engagement festival. Much of the procession was behind them, but they would fast catch up at the rate the morning was going. His younger daughter had insisted on coming part of the way to spend some final time with her sister. With the amount of training that Hanabi was going to have to receive to lead the clan, it was very likely that Hanabi wouldn't be able to travel to visit her sister in quite some time. With this in mind, he had allowed it. He watched the pair from afar. Hanako would have been proud of their strong bond, he was sure. He wasn't sure how to feel about the way the bid for clan leadership had turned out. Discover more. Books and literature. Books. He had faith that Hanabi would be a fearless and fair leader for his clan. But finding out how hard Hinata had worked to ensure that she lost the title of heiress had certainly improved his opinion of her abilities. Perhaps in time she would have made a good leader after all. Hiyashi shook his head. That was nothing but speculation now. His eldest had chosen a different path and he hoped that it was one she could live with. Hinata slowly made her way back to the carriage as Hanabi left on foot with her tutor. She was wiping her tears on her sleeve, but she didn't look back. She glanced up at him. "I'm ready to go, father," she said quietly as she climbed into the coach. The Hyuga leader nodded and followed her inside. The carriage started moving, and within minutes they were out of sight of the little coastal town that they had stopped in. They needed to travel further down the coast to a town that had larger ferries to the Uzushio island. The trip was silent aside from the sounds of the road. Hiyashi looked over at his daughter. She looked to be sleeping, but her breathing suggested otherwise. He didn't wish to disturb her. His thoughts turned to the impending festivities. Hiyashi was one of the few high-ranking council members of Konoha that had knowledge of what had happened to their resident pariah. He had been shocked enough to find out that the boy was the son of the fourth, but for him to leave to become the heir to another nation had seemed surreal at the time. Since then not much information had trickled forth from Uzushio. It was going to be interesting to see how the city and the nation fared with Naruto at the helm, although Hiyashi's chief concern was that things be stable enough so that Hinata was safe. The men who watched over Hinata as a young girl had told him that not long after she had entered the academy she had developed a crush on the Jinchuriki of Konoha. He tried to dissuade her then, but nothing had been effective. At that time, Hiyashi had had no other option than to hope her preference for the boy faded with age. However, when Naruto left the village, the effect on his eldest was immediate. She never said a word about what feelings she might be harboring, but it wasn't uncommon for him to walk past her quarters and hear quiet sobbing. To have the council come to him to seek to wed Hinata to her childhood crush seemed like a peculiar alignment of the stars. Perhaps Hanako was watching over her children after all. He longed to tell Hinata the details of the match, but it had been impressed upon him that the identity of the daimyo needed to remain a secret in the off chance that the daimyo's fiancé to be spilled the information to appear. Hiyashi knew his daughter was far more trustworthy than this, but it was specifically written into the betrothal contract, so his hands were bound. The carriage slowed down as it approached the ferry landing. They were within the final stages of their journey. They had the ferry ride, and then a final coach to take them up to the palace from the Uzushio city harbor. Hiyashi's feelings were mixed. Curiosity to see the rebuilt city was mingling with the growing discomfort of knowing that the loss of his daughter was imminent. He frowned. Hinata, wake up. We are changing our transportation. A few heavy blinks signaled his eldest's wake up. Yes, sir, she said, stretching. Hinata, wake up. We are changing our transportation. Her father's voice woke her from a comfortable slumber. Yes, sir, she replied, still feeling drowsy. She had found that the previous night's sleep didn't come to her as thoughts of leaving her sister and family bounced around in her head along with worries about meeting her betrothed. Although she was glad to catch up on some sleep, she was sure that she needed to clean up before meeting the daimyo. Her father exited the coach, and she followed, shielding her eyes from the sun with her hand. The clouds that had been hanging over the coach when she fell asleep had cleared, leaving a bright blue sky overhead as the party transferred themselves and their goods over to the ferry. It was a smooth process, and it didn't take long before the boat had set off toward their final destination. Hinata took its seat right at the edge of the boat and looked over the ocean. It had been ages since she had seen the ocean. She took a deep breath of the salty air and smiled. The spray coming up from the boat sparkled. The boat ride was pleasant although long. As much as she enjoyed being on the water, Hinata was glad to get off the boat and get one step closer to a hot bath. The carriage ride up to the palace far shorter than the ferry ride, but Hinata found it overwhelming. The island was very beautiful. Thick green foliage crowded the sides of the cobbled road. The large stones that marked the roadside edges had lush carpets of similarly colored moss. The natural beauty of the area was juxtapositioned with the remnants of the previous war. The solid cement structures of the past were crumbled and the natural world was fighting to retake it. The landscape slowly changed as the vehicle got closer to the center of the city. The destroyed buildings had been cleared away to make space for new ones. There were a handful of newly minted stone and cement buildings, supplemented with wooden buildings. Before long, they were in the center of the city where it was very hard to tell there had ever been such massive destruction. The raven-haired Kunoichi was thankful for the scenery that took her mind off the evening's event. Her nervous nature was beginning to flare up, and as the coach pulled up to the palace, her heart started hammering. The palace was a large building with a stone base and detailed traditional woodworking. As they drew closer, they looped around the back through a spectacularly tended garden before coming to halt in a stone courtyard. A group of servants from inside the palace came out to greet the coach. She balled her fists. She hadn't been this nervous since her first go through the Chunin exams. Her father, who had been riding in along with her in silence, gestured for her to leave before him. Her dark hair bobbed as she nodded. Hinata climbed out into the cool evening air. This way, my lady, said an older woman with dark chocolate hair. The younger nin followed the serving woman into the palace. Once she was inside, Hinata felt slightly more at home. The inside of the palace had a very similar feel to the Hyuga compound. The woman took her to a moderately small back room where there already a large basin filled with water warm enough to steam the mirror behind it. You go ahead and get cleaned up, lady. I'll have one of the other maids fetch your outfit. A quick, stiff nod was her only reply. She was really worried now. What if her fiancé didn't like her at all? What if she tripped while walking in the procession? A million dark-natured what-ifs haunted her as she dutifully climbed into the bath. The anxiety was crushing, and even the comforting lavender smell of the water didn't settle her nerves. It seemed that only a moment had passed when serving lady returned with her outfit. It was a stunning kimono that Hanabi had insisted she wear. Hinata had actually had it for some time, but always felt that it was too fancy to wear around Konoha. She didn't bother spending much time soaking in the basin. As soon as she was out of the water and covered in a robe, a flurry of maids descended upon her. The ladies helped her into her outfit, and then with far more precision and skill than she was used to, they styled her hair and painted on cosmetics. The rapid change from traveling to primping didn't help Hinata's mood. Stress ate at her and she fought to resist picking at her newly painted nails. The maids let her have a glance at herself in the mirror before they ushered her out of the dressing room and towards what she was told was an audience chamber. She did look very nice and she wished that her little sister could be around to see it. The pain of losing Hanabi reasserted itself and compounded her anxiety. Far too quickly, the Hyuga maiden found herself in the middle of a procession to greet the daimyo of Uzushiogakure. The overwhelming feeling of stress combined with a lack of proper food from traveling was making Hinata feel lightheaded. She swallowed thickly and focused on moving her feet in time with the other members of her household. Hinata fought to keep from looking down. So many people were looking at her, whispering to each other and mumbling. Her face felt hot and her chest felt tight. They were reaching the front of the procession now. The house members that were walking ahead of her were splitting off to the left and right, leaving the middle free. Just a few more people and she'd be able to clearly see her future husband's face. She tried to take a few calming breaths and glanced up at the raised platform that the daimyo was standing on. Her calming breath caught in her throat. The daimyo had short, unruly blonde hair and clear, shining blue eyes. It couldn't be, she thought, blinking a few times to ensure her vision was clear. As she moved a bit closer, the fine lines on his cheeks became more obvious. The heat in her face tripled with her embarrassment and confusion. Naruto was the daimyo. It couldn't be, but the closer she got and the more she was able to study him, the more sure she was. The look on his face was one of studied pleasantness. He wasn't dressed like any daimyo that she had ever seen. He was wearing a navy shirt and pants that were reminiscent of shinobi garb, but of obviously finer quality, with a white jacket over top that reminded her of the Hokages. The jacket had blue coming up in waves from the bottom and was embroidered with golden outlines of koi fish. The overall effect was that he looked both competent and regal. She felt a familiar shakiness in her knees. It was definitely Naruto and he was definitely the man of the hour. Hinata was nearly at the platform now. As she climbed the stairs, she watched as his face went from a somewhat neutral expression to an "oh" of surprise, and then a wide grin. She wobbled a bit stepping up onto the platform, and he immediately extended his hand to help her up. His hand was warm and strong, and her already fast heart rate sped up as he helped her onto the platform. Hinata, it's you. She looked up at him and saw genuine happiness in his eyes. Suddenly, the crowd of people sounded muffled and far away. Her vision narrowed and the last thing she saw before everything went black was the concern in Naruto's eyes. Naruto stood on a slight platform as the Konoha procession began. His face was already starting to feel tense from forcing a smile. For whatever reason, the council had been keeping the identity of his fiancée to be concealed. They hadn't even told Irie, who speculated that they were both being punished by the council. Earlier in the day, however, one of the council members had slipped up and spoke the surname of the lady, Hyuga. The young Uzushio ruler was oddly nervous about this. He had found most of the Hyuga to be sort of stuck up, even if Neji had turned out to be not all bad. Members of the Hyuga household were walking up the empty space in the middle of the room as parting as they got to the platform. It was formal, and it did look regal, but it also meant that he couldn't see his bride. His stomach did an uncomfortable flip at his last thought, bride. As the procession got shorter, he was able to make out the girl walking up the center. The blonde's eyes widened. She was pretty. Her kimono was lavender and pink, and it matched her eyes. Her long, dark hair shined as she walked, and her figure, well, pervy Sage would have been happy for him. The maiden seemed to waver slightly as she caught sight of him, a dark blush spreading over her cheeks. Something about that seemed very familiar. Naruto searched his brain. He must have met this girl before. By this point the young Hyuga had reached the platform, and started up the stairs. The beautiful maid stumbled on the stairs and he extended his hand to help her. She looked up at him, eyes wide and cheeks very red, and everything fell into place. All the training in the world wouldn't have hidden the surprise on Naruto's face. Hinata. He exclaimed, "It's you." He couldn't believe his luck. Out of all the Hyuga, she was definitely the best one. Even if he didn't have romantic feelings for her, at the very least, he had another friend. Grinning, Naruto glanced down at Hinata just in time to notice her eyes start to close. His eyebrows came together. Hinata. She went limp, and Naruto noticed just in time to catch her from hitting the floor. Hinata. Hinata blinked. She felt very warm and safe. She smiled and wriggled further into bed. Perhaps she would go back to sleep. Naruto. She bolted into a sitting position as her last waking events came back to her. Naruto was the daimyo she was supposed to marry. She covered her mouth as she gasped. She had fainted in front of all those people. How embarrassing. Discover more. Books. Books and literature. The raven-haired beauty looked around. She was definitely in a bedroom. It was a spacious room, with pleasant, cream-colored walls. The bed she was in was huge, and rose off the ground by half a meter. It was cozy, that was for sure. But whose room was it? She couldn't have been unconscious for long, and she was still in her fancy clothes from the procession. Sighing, she climbed out of the bed. Her hands shook slightly. She really didn't feel that much better. She needed to find something to eat. Treading with care, she headed towards the door. Just as she approached it, it swung inward. In her high-tension state, this startled her enough that she jumped back, and reached for where she would normally keep her kunai. Hinata shook her head. She sorely needed to relax. The first thing that entered the door was a tray with a piping hot plate of food resting on it, which was followed by an older woman, with wine-colored hair. "Oh good, you're awake," she said. Her tone was very no-nonsense, but not unkind. "Naruto was quite worried about you, you know. Unfortunately he's stuck downstairs talking to the Konoha delegation. He was going to come up again himself, but I stopped him." The redhead looked rueful. "He's still so impulsive. Thank you. Ah. Irie. Nice to meet you," she said as she passed the Konoha kunoichi the dinner tray. "I've been Naruto's head tutor for the past couple years." Hinata remembered her vaguely, because she was the nin that had picked up Naruto when she left. I'm Hyuga Hinata. Pleased to meet you." Hinata took the tray to a small table and sat on the cushion. Her stomach growled as the smell from the tray wafted up. Silently, she hushed it and tried not to be rude. "Would you care to join me?" The older woman laughed. "Thank you for the invitation, but we already ate downstairs. In fact, I need to go rejoin the counselors at the table. I'm sure Naruto will be up as soon as we finish up." Discover more. Books and literature. Books. With that, Irie left and Hinata dug into the meal that had been provided for her. It was delicious, and Hinata was ravenous. In no time she had finished the meal, yakizakana and miso soup. It was well prepared, and having eaten, she felt far, far better than she had in the last couple hours. That being said, her brain was still running a mile a minute, trying to wrap her head around the fact that the number one Konoha prankster was now overseeing an entire country. Of course, she was excited that her path had crossed Naruto's again, but how much had things changed? Was he still the same hyperactive, orange-loving kid who had recklessly fought everyone for acknowledgement? It was difficult to imagine him calmly talking to dignitaries. She pursed her lips. Perhaps that was unfair. Was she the same person as 3 years ago? Hinata liked to think that she wasn't, that she had grown from where she was before. He had spent years training specifically for this. Of course, he would have gotten better at it, because if there was one thing she knew, it was that Naruto achieved what he set his mind on. She cursed herself for not having the forethought to ask Irie to show her to where she would be staying. One might assume that she had been brought to her own room, but she couldn't find any of her bags. Perhaps they had been stored elsewhere. Aside from the main door that Irie had used, there were 2 other wooden doors, one on the far wall opposite the bed, and another right beside it. Hinata moved to the one closest to the bed and opened it. Her mouth opened a tiny bit in surprise. It was a lovely bathroom. It was all warm woods and white stone with a deep carved basin at the back of the room. Tearing herself away from the gorgeous tub, she went to investigate the other door. Behind it she found an open room that didn't have much in it aside from her bags and a large wooden wardrobe. It was quite a bit of space, and now that she found her belongings, she was much more comfortable in surmising that these were to be her quarters. It had been a very long day. She fumbled a bit finding the light, then opened up her bags to find her normal clothing. There had been no indication that she would be going back downstairs tonight. She started pouring water into the tub, and then returned to the wardrobe to disrobe from her fancy attire. Collecting more casual clothes, she returned to the washroom and climbed into the water. Unlike the first one she had hurriedly taken this evening, this one was completely relaxing. Hinata lay back as all the tension left her body. Despite the long journey and the stressful, sudden encounter with Naruto, she was happy. Never in 1,000 years would she have guessed that losing her position as heiress would work out so well. Discover more. Books and literature. Books. Her bath was a long one, and she had started to contemplate getting out of the cooling water when there was a rap knock on the door. Hinata jumped out of the bath and grabbed a towel in one swift motion. Coming, she called. She glanced around and realized that in her hurry to get into the bath, she hadn't grabbed all of her clothes. She bit her lip and tossed on a fluffy white robe. There was a second knock, slightly louder. She opened the door a crack. It was her, daimyo. Naruto. He placed both hands behind his head and grinned. Hey Hinata, I wanted to come up and check on you, and make sure you were okay. You really startled me down there, ya know. I'm feeling much better, but could you wait one moment before I let you in? Her voice seemed extra quiet, even to her. A slight blush crossed the blonde's face as he noticed that she was only in a robe. Oh, yeah, totally, I'll just, wait out here for you. Thanks, she said, slowly shutting the door, feeling like she might be strangled. Naruto had seen her in a robe. She rushed to change. Her original plan had been to changing into something that was less formal but still eye-catching, but that had been foiled as soon as she got flustered. Hinata pulled on the first outfit she found, a long purple sweater and black leggings. Hardly flattering, but far more appropriate than a robe. She hoped she hadn't taken too long. Hinata opened the door to find Naruto still standing outside. Oh okay, you can come in. Naruto's wide smile didn't waver as he followed her into her rooms. Wow, it looks great in here, he explained, looking around. Hinata's eyebrows lifted. You mean you haven't been in here before? He looked sheepish. Not since I first came to the palace. Irie more or less took care of the details. She did ask me what I thought should go in the empty room, but I had no idea what to suggest for a civilian girl. Not that you're a civilian. I didn't know it was going to be you, or even a ninja, till just before the ceremony. Anyway, never mind that. Was the trip okay? How's everything in Konoha? Hinata was surprised that he didn't know who was going to be his betrothed, but didn't inquire why that might be. She assured him that the trip had gone well and that things in their hometown had been settled and peaceful when they had left for the island. They spent quite some time talking about various people that Naruto had known and how they were getting along now. Once that conversation had petered out, they sat in silence for a moment. I'm sorry about what happened at the ceremony this evening. It's been quite a long time since I've passed out like that. Slightly over 3 years, she silently added. Nah, it's okay. It was kind of brilliant actually. It was a pretty boring dinner. I mostly just listened the counselors talk, and it wasn't much of substance. Maybe I should have passed out too. He laughed and it was infectious. A smile graced her face. Naruto looked down at her, and she was struck by how much taller he had grown. A faint blush returned to the kunoichi's face as he started speaking again. I'm glad that it was you, Hinata. I was really worried I was going to be stuck with some stiff, boring girl. Hinata wasn't sure if that was really a compliment, but her smile didn't waver. I was worried I'd have to hide my training. Discover more. Books. Books and literature. Hide it. He thought for a moment. Oh, yeah, the land of whirlpools is run a bit differently than the land of fire. Technically, I oversee the shinobi as well, although for the time being the head counselor, Hideaki has been overseeing it. Discover more. Books and literature. Books. This news absolutely increased Hinata's spirits, but it didn't slip her notice that Naruto frowned a bit when discussing the council. If they were anything like the Hyuga Council of Elders, she could understand the gesture. I just had a great idea. We should train together tomorrow. I haven't had a sparring partner my own age for, a while. Hinata swallowed hard. Oh, okay, she said, but will we have time tomorrow? I don't see why not. I mean, I got a couple meetings in the morning with the council, but my afternoon should be free. The official ceremony isn't until the end of the week during the festival. His words tapered to a stop, and they both didn't dare look each other in the eye. I look forward to the challenge, Hinata finally said, breaking the awkward silence that was looming. Great. Well, it's getting late, I guess I shouldn't be keeping you. Night. I'll see ya tomorrow. Naruto left Hinata's rooms, feeling more thankful that his fiancée-to-be was someone that he knew. Hinata seemed much the same as he remembered her, although maybe a little less shy. It comforted him that he had another trusted friend here, especially in a time when he couldn't trust his own counsel. It had struck him when he had been explaining the differences in the way shinobi operated in Uzushio to Hinata, that Hideaki was the one who headed up the ninja academy. He should know if one of the students was missing, and he would also be the one who could dispatch a team to find the missing boy. His previous inquiries with the lower council members hadn't given him any results in the whereabouts of Nobu. He decided that he'd probe further into the matter when he was in meetings the following day. If he could find a lead, of course. Hinata had been part of a tracker team back in Konoha. Maybe she could help him find the boy. He'd have to talk to her more about it tomorrow, maybe during or after their training. Excitement flared up in him. He hadn't trained with someone his own age since he got to Uzushio. His sparring partners were always just his tutors or sometimes ranked Uzushio shinobi. Naruto was more relaxed than he had been since the sudden announcement about the betrothal. The council had tried to weight him down and instead, they'd given him another ally. He was still grinning as he returned to him rooms. Once inside, he pulled off his shirt and climbed into king-size bed. Things were looking up. His peaceful sleep was nearly instantaneous. A loud knock at the door woke him, and by the dim light outside, he could tell it wasn't far past dawn. Groaning, he sat up. Wah, what is it? Irie poked her head into the room. I need to speak with you. I need to know what happened yesterday. It was too early for him to think straight. About what? He mumbled, still half asleep. His tutor crept into the room and closed the door. The girl, Hideaki, would have been the one to approve her. I'm sure this was mostly his doing. You spent quite a bit of time in her room last night. She paused, seemingly weighing her words. Can you trust her? He couldn't help it. Naruto laughed at the question. The redhead's brow furrowed. I know she's pretty, Naruto, but this isn't about wedded bliss, it's about the future of Uzushio. Relax, Irie. I know her from Konoha. We were in the same academy class, and made genin at the same time. And what else do you know about her? Well, she's a Hyuga. Irie looked unimpressed, which in turn made Naruto look sheepish. Hey, it's early. She can use the Byakugan and was part of a team of ninja that were good at tracking. She's always been really nice to be. I mean, she offered to let me take her answers in the Chunin exam. She also helped me figure out what to do when I was making my decision about leaving in Konoha. Irie thought it over. I see. Is she ill? Why did she pass out during the ceremony? The blonde shrugged. She passed out a couple times that I saw. I think she just kinda gets overheated, because her face is usually red too. Come to think of it, I think someone said that it mostly happens around me. He trailed off, trying to remember which of his classmates had told him that. The older woman smiled knowingly at her charge. Oh, if that's the case, I'm sure we have nothing to worry about. Naruto was baffled at her sudden change in tune. What had he said that convinced her? A yawn overtook him, and he rubbed his eyes. Is that all you wanted, Irie? Discover more. Books. Books and literature. She shook her head. I also wanted to give you this. I think it's a message from that guy. She made a face like she had bitten a. Knowing Irie, it was probably a message from Pervy Sage. He tore into the envelope and found that the message inside was encrypted. Naruto sighed, and climbed out of bed. Yawning a second time, he stretched and headed over to his desk in the corner of the room. His teacher glanced at the paper he was carrying. Sealed? She asked. He nodded in the affirmative. It was a basic encryption, but it was Jiraiya's own Fuinjustu key that was needed to unlock it. It had been one of the first seals that his godfather had taught him. Even with the morning fatigue weighing on him, he could perform the jutsu. He grabbed a brush off the desk, and roughly popped it into the inkwell. He painted several characters quickly on the back of his hand and performed the Hitsuji seal. Ink sprouted up over his wrist in an arc. Placing the message on the desk, he slapped the ink-covered hand down on top of it. In an instant, the ink on the page rearranged itself into something legible. He read through it and was instantly frustrated. There were no secrets in the message at all. It was merely a note that Jiraiya had heard of Naruto's female predicament, and would be back during the Festival of Tides to oversee things. Stupid Pervy Sage. Forcing me to do Fuinjutsu at this hour. Naruto trailed off into grumbling. Irie laughed. Get some sleep, Naruto. The meetings in the morning are going to be long. She waved over her shoulder and left as quickly as she came. Feeling irritable, Naruto returned to his bed. He hoped that he could get back to sleep, and that no one else would be barging in. Hideaki was the first to arrive at the meetings for the day. Cracking his arthritic knuckles, he sat at the massive circular table designated for council meetings. His mood surrounding their ruling predicament had improved substantially. He had high hopes that Naruto would be distracted, if not today, then shortly with the lovely and weak-willed maiden. Danzo had assured him that the Hyuga girl was a perfect match for his purposes. She was from a noble house and a lightning release kunoichi, but enough of a failure that she had lost her title as clan head. The betrothal was playing out exactly as he had hoped. The boy had left the dignitary dinners rather abruptly last night to check on his female companion. Hideaki was extremely pleased to watch the girl faint during the ceremonies the previous night. It confirmed that she would be a perfect docile wife to distract Naruto. Over the next several minutes, council members slowly trickled into the room. Many looked tired. Doubtless they had overindulged in drink the previous night. Hideaki's scowl deepened. He longed to place stricter rules in place for the counselors, but he didn't yet have that kind of control. He took a deep breath. Patience. He chided himself. The young daimyo himself strode into the room a few minutes before the scheduled start to the briefing. His posture was dignified, and his eyes were sharp, but the slight bagging under them suggested he hadn't gotten enough rest. Perfect. The young daimyo didn't acknowledge the council beyond curt nods until the meeting started. Hideaki was pleased that aside from the opening remarks, and the occasional question, the boy didn't add much to the meeting. He did seem more distracted than the last council meeting they had had. After a couple hours of discussion without Naruto interjecting much, Hideaki was feeling comfortable that his plan was foolproof. He decided to end the meetings quickly, with the hopes that the boy would further get wrapped up in the goings-on with his betrothed and the upcoming festival. Any further concerns before we adjourn this session? He asked counselors at the table, not bothering to look at Naruto. The table was quiet, until the youngest shinobi cleared his throat. I have a concern to bring forward, Hideaki, he stated, lacing his fingers together on the table. Ah, yes, my lord, what is the issue you wish to bring before the council? It has come to my direct attention that there is a missing boy from the capital, a member of the Nin Academy. He slid a mid-sized slip of paper across the table toward Hideaki. The paper was a missing persons notice, discolored by weather with marked rips on the top. The boy had clearly taken this from a bulletin within the town, which made Hideaki mildly uneasy. What was worse was that he had already covered the tracks of the abduction and could no longer shift the blame towards someone else easily without revealing his involvement, however trivial. Indeed, the loss of a nin that was likely to never make it beyond the regular forces was a small price to pay for his outside investors' help, but only so long as he himself didn't get caught in the crosshairs. His face twisted into that one of great concern, and he looked up to meet Naruto's eyes. The usual warmness was missing from the boy's stare. "I'm horrified to say that this is the first I have heard of this matter, my lord. It may signify some sort of error in our reporting systems or a breakdown in the chain of command. I will see to this matter immediately," he said as he put on his most grandfatherly look. After all, these young nin are the future of our great nation. The distrust in the young ruler's eyes flared. Naruto did not trust him perhaps, but he surmised that the boy had not found any direct evidence of his so-called blackened fingers. "I want regular updates on this matter until Nobu is found," Naruto declared, more forceful than usual. "I made a promise and I am going to keep it. As my lord wishes," Hideaki said with a slight bow. The room of counselors fell silent for several moments before the end of the meeting was declared formally. At once, the blonde shinobi rose from his seat and left, jacket flapping in his wake. Hideaki sat for a moment as the lower council members began to murmur about the missing boy. Tightly reining in his unbridled rage for the morning's events and the foolish young man who forced them, Hideaki too got up to leave for his study. He would have to meet with his more knowledgeable agents and create a plan to pay his associate a visit. He could not afford more missing persons on the isle for the time being. As for Naruto, he would have to wait and simply hope that the betrothal plan worked before more drastic measures had to be taken. Naruto left the council meeting feeling vaguely uneasy. He didn't trust Hideaki, but did that make him a kidnapper? Hideaki could have been lying about knowing nothing of the matter, but it horrified him to think that one of the head council could be so corrupt as to kidnap innocent students. The old man was a conniving old wretch, but he was a patriot. He ran his hand through his blonde mop of hair. He didn't want to believe that the founder of the Whirlpool Independence Foundation would be actively harming the Uzu citizens. Despite this, doubts nagged him. Something about the man's reaction didn't add up. He shook his head. A good training session would help put him more at ease. Hinata. That's right, he said he was going to spar with her today. The idea buoyed his mood substantially. Not only did he want to spend more time with his friend, but he wanted to test his skills on someone who trained outside the village of Uzu. How did he stack up against his schoolmates from his childhood? He hurried to his room to change into training garb, before running to Hinata's quarters. Hinata sat on her bed, picking at her thumbnail. Today she was sparring with Naruto. At first, she had been overwhelmed with excitement, but this soon soured into worry. It was difficult for her to pinpoint her anxiety about the afternoon, but much of it may be that she just didn't want to disappoint her betrothed. She didn't know how she would fare sparring with him, and she hardly knew what his expectations were. It had been too long since she had gone all out for her to actually gauge her skill set. Her heart was already hammering in her chest before she heard the knock at her door. Coming. She hurried to the door, taking a deep, steadying breath before opening it. She opened the door to find two bright blue eyes and a beaming smile on the other side. Hey Hinata. Discover more. Books and literature. Books. The heat of her body rose to her face. Hi. She stammered out. Naruto was dressed in navy slacks and a burnt orange top. It was similar to his outfit from the previous night, but more functional and somehow more him. Seeing him in his trademark color brought a smile to her face. The pause in their exchange didn't go unnoticed. Is something wrong? Oh, nothing. It's just, you look quite nice in orange. Her voice faded to a high whisper and her face turned red as she spoke. He laughed. I'm glad you think so, because it's still my favorite color, ya know. His easy demeanor smoothed over the slight awkwardness of the exchange and the two set off toward the training grounds. The training grounds were tucked away behind the gardens, which the pair jogged through as means of a warm-up. The gardens were well tended and in full bloom, and she found her lips curved into a small smile as she followed Naruto through the foliage. How many times had she dreamed of being in a place like this with her crush? Perhaps not jogging, but still, it was enough to fill her heart until it was bursting at the seams. Making a mental note to take a longer, far slower stroll through the gardens later, she followed Naruto through the large stone arch that marked the entrance to the training grounds. The training grounds in looks were very similar to the ones back in Konoha, other than the fact that the forest bordering the side of the grounds was made up of thin, wiry island trees rather than the thick foliage of the Land of Fire. Naruto ran his hand through his wayward blonde locks. So, where do you want to start? Hinata blushed. I'm not sure. Start with 10 minutes of katas, a voice stated from above them. Hinata's eyes widened and she glanced up to find Naruto's tutor balanced on a tall wooden pole several meters to the left of the pair. She hopped down and landed smoothly behind them. People are going to talk if you two spend too much time alone unchaperoned before the festival, you know, she said. She sounded serious, but her lips were turned into a playful smile. Vaguely horrified at breaking a traditional protocol, Hinata nodded in assent to the declaration. Naruto merely rolled his eyes. I seriously doubt that people were going to be gossiping about daytime sparring, Irie. You just want to watch me spar against an unfamiliar taijutsu. The older woman grinned wickedly. Astute observation, my lord, she said before clapping her hands together. 10 minutes of katas, go. Hinata dropped into her gentle fist stance, and began going through the forms. It had been several days since she had had the time to train, and even doing such a basic exercise calmed her. These forms were second nature to her now and she moved through them with ease. A few minutes into the katas, Hinata was struck by how confident and worry-free she was feeling. In the past years leading up to the fight for clan leadership, even simple katas made her fret. Was her footwork good, but not too good? Were her forms adequate but not precise? She had towed this line for so long, she had forgotten what it was to simply train to better oneself, seeking improvement and perfection before all else. A slight smile graced her face as she began the most difficult set of forms. Hinata didn't need an outside eye to tell her that her execution of them had been without fault. It didn't escape Hinata's notice that Naruto's tutor was watching her almost as much as she was inspecting her charge. This wasn't altogether unsurprising. She was sure there wasn't any nin in the land of whirlpools that had an understanding of all the Hyuga taijutsu kata. Still, Hinata was deeply thankful for her flawless demonstration. Irie was obviously quite close with her student, and Hinata wanted the burgundy-haired kunoichi to like her, if only to make things easier for her budding relationship with Naruto. Within another minute or so, their warm-up was complete. Naruto stepped backwards a few paces and faced her with a wide grin. Ready? Hinata nodded, nerves flaring. Naruto, Irie called, again positioned on the wooden pole. What? No shadow clones. The blonde shinobi rolled his eyes. I wasn't going to. Hinata thought about the massive amount of clones Naruto had been able to generate during the Chunin exam and was relieved. She didn't expect that her friend was actually going to harm her, but she also doubted she could take on dozens of Naruto copies by herself. Ready? Naruto asked again. She was nearly shaking, and she wasn't sure if it was nervousness or excitement. Ready? She called. Naruto charged her immediately. It was fast and bold, something like what she expected when facing off against Kiba. He came at her with a series of punches that she easily deflected. She jumped over his low kick, before hopping further back to reorient herself. His attacks had not been half as quick as his charge had been. He was testing her, likely making sure that he wouldn't accidentally land a crippling blow. He had stopped the barrage for a moment, hesitating. Hinata could almost hear her cousin's voice, telling her that their taijutsu was a nimble art and to take advantage of the small pauses that can be found in slower styles. Naruto charged her again, and this time she met him head-on, dodging a broad hooked punch and firing off 2 hurried jabs at his exposed side. He took the light hit and used the momentum of the failed punch to swing his body around until a kick was aimed directly at her eye level. Hinata put her forearms together to block the hit, the familiar reverberation in her bones reminding her again of sparring with Team 8. Hinata didn't have time to react before a scoffing noise from Irie stopped the fight prematurely. That was like watching 2 kittens battle it out for a treat. The pair of you looked so timid. Naruto looked slightly abashed. Well, I didn't want to hurt her. You won't. Lady Hyuga, am I right that you were on active duty until very recently? Hinata nodded. Until 3 weeks ago, ma'am, she squeaked. She felt vaguely uneasy being called Lady Hyuga, as that title in Konoha hadn't been spoken since the passing of her mother. And what was your rank, if you don't mind me asking? Chunin. The raven-haired Kunoichi noticed Naruto's eyes widen slightly. She hadn't told him that the previous night, had she? And Lady Hyuga, I know you are, friends with Naruto, but you don't have to worry about harming him. He's resilient. He spars primarily with Jonin from Uzu and trains with a sage. Irie explained. Plus he has an extremely thick skull, she added with a wink. Hinata's face heated up as she caught the older woman's meaning. She had only been in Uzushiogakure for a day and already someone had noticed her crush. No need to embarrass her, Irie, Naruto said in reaction to Hinata's blush. She didn't know that Jiraiya, comes out here to train me. Irie shared a brief glance with Hinata, as it became clear that Irie's previous intonations had gone over